Uncovering the Pope's final secret. Was his death really natural? The Vatican's last whisper. In the early morning hours, as the world was just waking up, news spread rapidly. The Pope had died peacefully in his sleep. The official statement from the Holy See was brief and clinical. Images showed St. Peter's Square adorned with flowers, mourners in silent prayer, and global leaders offering condolences. Yet behind this solemn scene, those close to the pontiff sensed unease. In his final days, the Pope had made cryptic references to a final truth and an invisible battle within the Vatican. His death, though presented as serene, was unexpected. Members of his inner circle began to speak, off the record anonymously, burdened by what they had witnessed. They recounted the Pope's recurring dreams, his growing anxiety, and his belief that something, or someone, was trying to silence him. In response, he penned a document he called his Recreto, sealed with his pastoral ring and entrusted to the Vatican's secret archive with instructions, "Open only if I die unexpectedly." This document became central to a story that was far from over. The Recreto wasn't a spiritual testament but a warning, containing names, dates, and confessions that were never meant to leave the sacred walls. Yet someone within the Vatican chose not to remain silent. What they revealed was more disturbing than any conspiracy theory. That the Pope's death might not have been natural, his final dreams could have been prophetic, and the Recreto was not a farewell, but a desperate cry for truth. Dreams that never silenced. In the weeks leading up to his death, the Pope was plagued by vivid dreams that disrupted his daily functions. According to leaked accounts from his close associates, he would awaken in the night, drenched in sweat, murmuring phrases in ancient Latin. He kept a diary by his bedside, filled with symbols, fragmented names, and recurring scenes. A hooded figure, dark Vatican corridors, empty chalices, and the sound of doors closing behind him. These were not mere delusions. To him, they were warnings. Determined to document these visions, he composed the Recreto. It wasn't an official document, but an act of resistance. In it, the Pope described his dreams and linked them to real events during his papacy. He spoke of missing reports, unauthorized decisions made in his name, and pressures to suppress urgent matters. The document's tone oscillated between despair and clarity, aiming not to incite panic, but to alert. The coded names left little room for misinterpretation by those familiar with the Vatican's inner workings. Fearing his dreams were more than just mental fatigue, the Pope secretly consulted a select group of theologians and Vatican astrologers versed in medieval dream interpretation. One, of German origin, noted that his visions aligned with patterns described in the forbidden archives of Saint Malachy, a 12th century bishop who allegedly predicted the end of the papacy as we know it. The Pope took this as a sign, leaving instructions for the Recreto to be stored in a special box alongside his diary. The final page bore a phrase in different ink: "If I don't wake up, it wasn't an accident." The sealed archive, deep within the Vatican, lies the Apostolic Secret Archive, a place few have heard of and fewer have entered. Here, the Church's most sensitive documents are stored. Letters from emperors, papal confessions, reports on unrecognized miracles, and warnings the world has never seen. It was here that the Recreto was deposited, sealed with the Pope's pastoral ring and a purple ribbon, a code reserved for matters deemed potentially destructive to doctrinal stability. The archive's custodian, an elderly monk with over 30 years of service, received the document and signed a custody act without opening it, as per the Pope's instructions. However, following the pontiff's death, the protocol changed. The Secretariat of State ordered an immediate review, arguing that all personal documents of the deceased pope needed verification to prevent potential misinterpretations. What they found wasn't just a letter, it was a bombshell. The Recreto contained not only dreams, but connections between real events and possible internal betrayals. Most striking was a section titled "The Last Dream," where the Pope hinted at identifying a key figure who wished him dead. He didn't name them directly, only an initial. This was enough to cause panic at the highest levels of the Curia. Some advocated for its destruction, others for even more secure storage. Yet a young priest who had served as the Pope's scribe made a copy. This version, secretly scanned, was sent via encrypted network to an Italian journalist with whom the Pope had corresponded. She didn't immediately reveal its contents, but provided enough clues for the world to suspect. The document wasn't a farewell, it was an accusation. The invisible illness, officially, the Pope's cause of death was heart failure during sleep. The Vatican's medical reports were brief and bureaucratic. However, days before his passing, the pontiff had received a contradictory diagnosis: extreme fatigue and irregular oxygen levels, but no signs of terminal illness. His personal physician, who had served him for a decade, assured close media contacts that, while tired, the Pope showed no signs of impending death. This contradiction didn't go unnoticed, especially when the doctor was removed from the official medical team shortly after the Pope's death, without public explanation. In the Recreto, the Pope reflected on his health. "My body obeys, but my soul is heavy. I feel something external has entered me, something that doesn't belong." These words, written with a weaker hand than the rest of the document, suggested a progressive mental or spiritual deterioration. He spoke of intervened rooms, unauthorized visits, and medications arriving in unlabeled bottles. All of this was ignored in the official report, but within the context of the Recreto, it becomes deeply unsettling. The possibility of slow poisoning through psychoactive substances or neural disruptors was suggested by independent forensic experts after reviewing preliminary reports. However, the Vatican never authorized an external autopsy. As a sovereign state, the Holy See isn't obligated to permit international medical audits. The Pope's body was displayed in a closed casket, unusual for natural deaths. Witnesses noted his face bore an expression different from the usual peace, as if he had wanted to say something but wasn't given the time. Was it truly a natural death, or the ultimate price for attempting to reveal a truth too vast? The censored legacy, continuous sum. According to an anonymous chambermaid, that homily contained direct statements about institutional fear of truth, complicit silence, and the need to cleanse the temple, even if it means losing part of the altar. According to him, it was the boldest sermon the Pope had ever written, but it never reached the pulpit. Instead, the interim successor read a generic message filled with theological metaphors and no personal references. The Recreto was not mentioned, nor was the Pope's desire to open sealed archives from the 20th century. Everything was carefully neutralized, as if they were trying to protect his image from himself. That final act of censorship had an unexpected result. Instead of extinguishing the fire, it fueled it. Parts of the Recreto began to circulate through encrypted networks, clandestine theological forums, and alternative media. The most committed believers started organizing symbolic readings, treating the censored content as sacred scripture. They didn't seek to create a new doctrine, but to revive his voice. For them, the Pope's truth didn't die with him. It was merely being hidden. And a censored legacy is a confession without words. The bells that never rang. On the day of the Pope's funeral, something unusual occurred. At 6 a.m., when the bells of St. Peter's Basilica should have rung to announce the beginning of the funeral rites, there was no sound. For exactly 13 minutes, the Vatican remained in absolute silence. Many attributed it to a technical failure, but experts in liturgical protocol insist that such a malfunction is nearly impossible. The bells of St. Peter's are operated through redundant systems with automatic backups in place. What happened that morning wasn't an accident. It was a signal, or perhaps a warning, because during those 13 minutes, while the square waited and cameras pointed at the sky, a select group of cardinals entered a sealed chamber inside the Apostolic Palace, carrying a document, the Recreto. According to leaked reports, the full text was read aloud in that private meeting. One of the attendees, a cardinal from Africa, allegedly stood up after hearing the final lines and exclaimed, "We cannot bury this." But his protest was silenced. An official record acknowledged the document's existence, yet it was decreed it should not be made public. In its place, a softened, symbolic summary was written, a diplomatic digest archived under the title, Unconfirmed Spiritual Testament. Those 13 minutes without bells were the moment history had to change. But it didn't. Since then, every year, on the anniversary of the Pope's death, the bells fall silent again for exactly 13 minutes. No explanation, no statements. But those who were present, those who saw the trembling signature on that final page, know what the silence means. The time the world had to speak the truth and chose not to. Today, that moment has become a symbol. In churches around the world, when the bells fall silent, the faithful no longer pray for the Pope's soul. They pray for the awakening of the church. The face without a name. Throughout the Recreto, a figure appeared again and again. Not a named enemy, nor a direct accusation, just a silhouette. The Pope called it the man without a face, a presence that haunted his dreams and loomed on the edge of his consciousness in his final days. In the document, this figure represented something constant, silent, ever-present, even in prayer. The most unsettling thing wasn't his appearance, but what he stood for. Power without identity, decisions without soul, doctrine without light. He is everywhere, but I do not see him, the Pope wrote. He walks not like a man, nor speaks like a brother. He is the system. The Holy Father never clarified if this figure was literal or symbolic, but his fear was real. Some scholars who analyzed the Recreto after it was leaked suggest that this man without a face may have represented a network of power within the Vatican. Not a single cardinal, but a hidden structure, what many have called a church within the church, a shadow organization that influences decisions far beyond public votes or papal decrees. According to the Recreto, this presence blocked key reforms, manipulated internal reports, and even had a hand in medical briefings related to the Pope's health. It was not a doctrinal debate, it was a spiritual war between truth and preservation, between divine light and institutional survival. The Pope wasn't afraid of scandal. He feared what would follow: widespread disillusionment, spiritual collapse, the faith of millions shaken. That's why he chose symbols, not names, metaphors instead of public judgment. He wanted to awaken the church, not destroy it. The man without a face wasn't just a person, it was everything the rigid institution refused to confront. And in the Pope's final dreams, this figure was always watching, always waiting. Not outside the church, but at its very heart. The final dream still lives. No tomb is deep enough to bury a truth written with tears. The Pope knew his words would be resisted, distorted, or simply ignored. That's why he didn't only write with ink, he wrote with symbols, with silences, with small acts that today carry a different meaning. The Recreto wasn't just a document, it was a mirror reflecting what the church could be if it embraced its own light, and what it feared when forced to face its shadow. That final dream wasn't just a prophetic vision, it was an open question posed to the soul of every believer. Is it possible to remain faithful to the truth when that truth threatens the powerful? Since his passing, new investigations have been opened, sealed archives partially declassified, and limited access granted to once forbidden documents. But none of it has been enough to answer the essential question. The issue is no longer whether the Pope died naturally, but whether he was allowed to die in peace. The question remains unanswered, and perhaps it always will. But something undeniable has begun. A movement, a new wave of believers who no longer accept official stories without first asking who wrote them. Those who no longer fear looking into the places others would rather leave in darkness. And now it's your turn. If this story made you think, subscribe to this channel, leave a like, and share this video with those who still believe that faith and truth must walk together. Because maybe the Pope's last miracle wasn't his pontificate, but his ability to make millions open their eyes. Because as long as someone is listening, the final dream still lives. And as long as the Recreto echoes in the hearts of the restless, truth will never truly die.